Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is Jihad Abu Salim, Executive Director of the Jerusalem Fund here in Washington, D.C. And I'm joined by my wonderful guests tonight, Sandra Tamari and Iman Abid. We'll just give it a couple of minutes for people to join and then we will start our conversation for tonight. Thank you so much all for joining. All right. Welcome again, everyone. Thanks so much for joining and for being with us tonight. My name is Jihad Abu Salim. I'm the Executive Director of the Jerusalem Fund for Education and Community Development, a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. that works on educating the public in the United States about the Palestinian experience and story, and work on improving the lives of Palestinians in their homeland and in the diaspora. Tonight's webinar is part of a series called Dispatches from Gaza, a webinar series that delves into the ongoing situation in the Gaza Strip and help us understand how to engage with it and learn about it. Tonight's webinar is titled Solidarity in Action, the US-Palestine Movement Response to Gaza. And the goal of tonight's webinar is to learn from our guests about the different kinds of efforts that are taking place to address the genocide that's happening in the Gaza Strip, and what are some of the ways we as communities, as individuals, as citizens in this country, respond to the ongoing catastrophe on the ground and take action and educate each other and educate our communities. So I'm going to introduce my guests, and then both of them have prepared PowerPoint presentations that they will share with you. They will talk about resources, they will talk about different actions and strategies that different groups and organizations are using, and tools that different groups and organizations are using to address the ongoing situation in Gaza and mobilize people here to take action. There are a lot of efforts. We have been receiving a lot of questions from a lot of our followers. What can we do? What needs to be done? And I hope tonight's webinar will provide some answers and give some guidance. So allow me first to introduce our speakers. Sandra Tamari, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Sandra Tamari is a Palestinian organizer and the executive director of Adalah Justice Project, AGP. She is a co-founder of the St. Louis Palestine Solidarity Committee and was co-chair of the steering committee for the US Campaign for Palestinian Rights from 2015 to 2018, based in St. Louis. The murder of Mike Brown in Ferguson in August 2014 greatly impacted Sandra's work, and since then she has focused on building joint liberation efforts between Palestinians and Black communities. She was a lead organizer of the Palestinian contingent to Ferguson in October in 2014. We're also joined by Iman Abid, who is the Director of Advocacy and Organizing at the US Campaign for Palestinian Rights, USCPR. Prior to joining USCPR, Iman was the Regional Director at the American Civil Liberties Union of New York, ACLU of New York, for 6 years. She has spent the last decade community organizing across New York on issues ranging from immigration, justice to mass incarceration. In 2021, she testified in front of the United Nations High Commissioner as part of a panel highlighting the impacts of police brutality on African Americans in the United States. Iman is also a co-founder of Free the People Rock, a Rochester, New York-based organization that formed from the Black Lives Matter movement of 2020 following the murders of George Floyd and Daniel Prude. Sandra and Iman, thank you for joining us. Welcome. I think we will start with Sandra's presentation. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jihad. Our heart is with you, and our heart is with everyone in Gaza. Iman, I'm so grateful to share this platform with you. We've been struggling together. We've been in DC a lot together, putting together different actions. And I'm hoping that today will show you that it's it's not so hard to organize. It really is a matter of relationship building. You don't need leaders. You just need close friends. You need people that share your message about a ceasefire, immediate ceasefire, and dignity and freedom for Palestinians. And anyone can organize. Anyone can organize. And so I'm hoping that today, through this conversation, we can give you the confidence to go forward and give you some tools that will help you do just that, to take action. I'm going to share my screen because I want to show you that, it seems like a very, difficult time right now, but I just want to show that you're not alone. Data for Progress did a poll 8 days ago, and I'm really be interested in how this has changed since then, because the pictures and the news coming out of Gaza is so grim. But it shows that a majority of voters are not in favor of continuing violence in Gaza. What is interesting is that it does show that 80% of Democratic voters are strongly against continued violence, are calling for a ceasefire, and even a majority of Republicans are in favor of a ceasefire. I think this is really important for us to remember as we are pushing our lawmakers, saying that we are not a minority. Palestinians are not alone in calling for a ceasefire. It's not just a Muslim issue. This is an issue for all Americans. Especially now as we are thinking about how quickly the US has, turned to giving billions and billions of dollars to weapons in an era when we saw that there was no response for COVID. There's been no infrastructure for housing. There's been no healthcare investments. These are the things that we've known for so long. There's always money to invest in harm and divest in death, and no money for life-affirming policies. And so I think that that's part of our messaging as well, because I think that what we're seeing is that brown and Black populations in the US have automatically seen affinity toward a Palestinian position on this issue. And I think we'll continue to see that grow. I just want to let y'all know that we have been flooding Congress with letters, phone calls. This is all thanks to you. Just with our letter tool on GazaIsPalestine.com, we have sent over 250,000 letters to Congress. I know Iman will have similar numbers from the US campaign. They're hearing from us. And I just want to emphasize that it's really important to keep writing, keep calling. Today, I called my senator 5 times. I don't want them to think they can get away with this. I want to make sure that they're logging the numbers. They don't know they don't know exactly that you're the same person that's called, but they will be able to track numbers and to say, we're hearing overwhelmingly for a ceasefire. I know that many of you have heard that our Jewish allies have been on the streets and really taking bold action as we speak. I don't know, the live stream was very loud, and Grand Central Station in New York is full of young Jews who are closing down the train station. I think at least 1,000 people are risking arrest tonight in New York. This builds on actions that happened this past week at the White House, led by If Not Now, and at the Capitol Rotunda with Jewish Voice for Peace. Over 300 people were arrested at the Capitol, including my daughter. Proud of her. She joined the Jewish contingent to say a ceasefire. And then there have been different tactics, in New York, also mass civil disobedience. Hundreds of people were arrested at Senator Gillibrand's office. There was really good news coverage of that in the pouring rain. We've been bird dogging different members of Congress in Chicago. Youth were disrupting a visit by Senator Duckworth to a mosque. And then different groups have been staging sit-ins at different offices. And, this is a picture of a sit-in that Adalah Justice Project organized with dissenters in Ro Khanna's office. In Chicago, for a long time, they've been sitting in at Jen Schakowsky's office. And then Iman and I will talk a little bit about an action we took at Hakeem Jeffries' office this past week as well. It's been inspiring, and it's been interesting to see the kind of like response we're getting. For instance, when we were at Ro Khanna's office, there was no police. They did not call Capitol Police. They definitely did not want media. A media story of young people being dragged out of the office. So we occupied the office for 4 hours. And we basically took over the office. We used the representative's office for private meetings away from staff. They were just like very scared that they were going to get bad headlines based on what we were doing. We chose Ro Khanna as as a target, largely because he represents himself as a progressive. He was very, very vocal in opposing Saudi bombings of Yemen. And he has not signed on to the ceasefire resolution that's being led by Cori Bush. So I think there are lots of vulnerabilities, and we have to keep pushing these progressive lawmakers. So we can give you some ideas about targets if you're interested in hearing more about that. Let's see if I can move ahead. Yeah. So I mentioned that we were involved in a sit-in, a pray-in actually, at Hakeem Jeffries' office. Hakeem Jeffries is the minority House leader. He is a Black lawmaker who was raised in the Baptist church and, likes to talk about his faith a lot. And so we took Black ministers, Black Baptist ministers to his office, an imam, a rabbi, and an interfaith delegation that went to him to say, the world is watching, ceasefire is the moral choice. And it was a very powerful convening. And you can see, we were very prayerful. We sang and we recited the names of 200 of the martyrs from Gaza. We could have been there all day if we were to recite all the names, and it might be something we want to do in the future, to take Capitol and announce all the names for however long it takes. And we also put up these notes on Hakeem Jeffries' placard to remind him of the people that have been killed. And you can see, so many of the people have the same last name. You have a Shahabi family, someone, Mustafa Shahabi, 96, along with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Aisha Shahabi, 4 years old. And, this is a very effective way of bringing home the cost of this terrible, terrible genocide they're carrying out and supporting. And so I just want to close to say that we have developed a website. Jihad knows we've been campaigning on Gaza for some time. And in 2021, we launched a campaign called Gaza is Palestine. And if you go to gazaispalestine.com now, we have created a resource hub that will allow you to write to your representatives. It will allow you to tweet at your members of Congress if you use Twitter or use X, however you want to refer to it. And it has other resources like how to organize within your school. Say your school has put out a really biased, statement that's anti-Palestinian. It hasn't acknowledged the loss of Palestinian life. There's some resources there that give you advice on how to deal with that. And then other ideas, in addition to the pray-ins that we've talked about, you can do these kinds of actions in district. You don't have to be in DC to do this. You can also do sit-ins in district. And then like I said at the beginning, I encourage you to organize within your own communities. You can organize within your church, within your school, within your workplace, within your union. I've seen groups popping up: moms for ceasefire, children for ceasefire, librarians for ceasefire, et cetera, et cetera. So you all have a role to play. You all have communities. You all have friends. And so I just encourage you to take that power that we have and show up as best you can. And I just close and say that we're all going to be in DC on November 4th for a national mobilization, national march on Washington. And so if you can be in Washington, we would love to see you there. Obviously, not everyone can make it there. If there are affinity protests in your local in your local locales, let us know about them. You can go to GazaIsPalestine.com and you can enter your protest so that we can get the word out about what's happening in different cities. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Iman.
Thank you, Sandra. Okay, let me share my screen. Let's go. Let me make sure. Okay, should be showing up. Great. So again, I am also deeply honored to be here alongside Sandra and Jihad. And I know that this conversation is quite somber as we are facing quite the genocide and the atrocity that I think many of us maybe have at one point anticipated, but didn't think would happen so soon. And I think that unfortunately, due to the oppressive structures and the apartheid system that we know many of us have been calling to end, that so long as it continued to exist, that one day or another, this level of atrocity would one day happen. And so as I speak to you all today, I sit with so many mixed emotions and feelings. I think that many of us are feeling paralyzed. I think maybe even disassociating from the level of atrocity of information that we've been receiving. I know that many of us, it sounds like, you know, and I hold my heart for Jihad, who has been doing such incredible work and also has family back home in Gaza. And so I want to say that as a Palestinian who does have family in the West Bank, but not necessarily in Gaza, I hold up our people and I hold up one another in all of this work that we do. And while we may be exhausted as we continue to advocate, and sometimes it feels like maybe we're screaming into a void, the reality is that the work and the pressure that we are continuing to put back onto people like Congress and the president and the international community is actually working. And I know that sometimes it's hard to see because the numbers of people who are dying is not necessarily matching up with what we are seeing or what we're necessarily pursuing, you know, in Congress. And so my hope is that one thing that we can instill in folks again is that the reality is people power works, and us stepping in and advocating for the people of Gaza is actually working. And so I know that if you're here today, I'm imagining that you are the type of person who has contextualized this moment long before October 7th, that this isn't something that popped up to you or was of interest to you in the last 2 weeks, that you've probably heard about what's been happening in Gaza. You've probably been aware of what the siege in Gaza for the last 16 plus years, and you've known about the inhumane conditions that the people of Gaza have been living in. And now we're actually in real time watching this genocide happen. And it's hard to comprehend, but we know that we need to keep pushing, and we know that we need to keep doing what we can and putting the pressure again on those who are in power to do the work. So for those who are maybe stepping into this for the first time and advocating on an issue like this for the first time, I know that I love to say that I want folks to contact Congress, but I want to kind of take a step back and say why. And we know that Congress and the President of the United States have incredible amount of power and influence over what happens in the region. And we understand that first and foremost, that Israel has the power that it has because of the level of unconditional aid that the United States has provided to Israel over the course of the last few decades. I mean, 75 years we're talking about here. And so it's really important to recognize that the United States plays an incredible role in the apartheid state and has actually really undermined the dignity and the humanity of the Palestinian people. And so as we assess that power and we understand what power Congress and the president have, we know that it's our duty to ensure that we influence and target Congress to actually take a stand with the American people. Sandra shared at the beginning of her presentation that most people want a ceasefire. I mean, one of our demands long before then was the fact that we were calling for the end of military funding, because we knew that if we continued offering this $3.8 billion a year, unconditionally, unequivocally, we knew that at one point or another that Israel would remain remain this apartheid state, would remain doing these atrocious things to our people, whether it was across Gaza or the West Bank, without any level of accountability, as we understood that the money was consistently rolling in from the United States to the Israeli government, again, with no questions asked, no level of accountability, be it coming from the United States or any other international, institution, and could be permitted to continue doing what it's already been doing. And now we're seeing this unfold, and we're still seeing, statements by our president who are, making statements around like, we still stand with Israel, that we still standing this, but yet the American public is really shifting in the direction of where we're all, positioning ourselves, and that's to position ourselves in favor of the Palestinian people. And so I'm just deeply grateful for the fact that, like, we're in a place where we are seeing this resonate amongst the general public. We are seeing it happen across the international community, really. And the amounts of pictures that I'm hoping folks have already been able to see regarding the mobilizations, the tens of thousands of people, the 300,000 that showed up in London, the 10,000 showed up in DC. There are so many mobilizations that have been happening since October 7th as a reminder to the international community that most people do actually stand with the people of Gaza and with the people across the rest of Palestine. And it's our duty and it's our responsibility to continue pushing for that. And so many of our organizations, and I'll speak again for the US Campaign for Palestinian Rights, have been trying our best to help people kind of digest that information. As we understand, Congress can sometimes be quite a whole, and it's really difficult to grasp and comprehend what's going on. So we want to make it easy for you. Sandra shared a great tool for folks to call and email their members of Congress, and we too are doing the same. And the hope is that if we have multiple tools, we can access a much wider base, right? Like, there are many times across our movement where we work together, and there are many times where even in the action tools, despite the fact that they may look slightly different, are targeting the same people. So in this case, what I'm presenting to you here is actually a Gaza call tool. So this tool itself would actually provide you a script once you click on the link and actually allow you to call your legislator directly, making it really easy for you. We have a whole script in line. We want to make sure that folks find it easy. We understand that the information can sometimes be all over the place, but we really wanted to help folks synthesize what we specifically are asking our legislators for, and making the call right now in this moment to call for that ceasefire. So it's something that I think that, again, is really important. We hope that folks can continue using. This is just kind of a snapshot of what it looks like when you click it. The tool itself actually lists out a number of resources and links that I'll kind of go through over the course of the next few slides. And this specific screenshot actually shows you the tools and the links that, again, if you want to go back, it's USCPR.org/Gaza-Call. That's our call tool. But if you want to go into the resource and toolkit, if you go to this link, USCPR.org/Stop-Gaza-Genocide, you'll be able to find a list of resources that we've been able to kind of put together and encourage folks to use, so that we can, again, make sure that we're making these constant calls to Congress, and we're making these emails to Congress. So depending on what you're comfortable with, and maybe what your host of friends are comfortable with, as we are encouraging folks to share out these tools and resources with people, we want to make sure that you have everything readily available for you. And we promise you, we are making sure that it's up to date. We're making sure that it's, it's working effectively, and that it's as easy as possible for folks. So this is a resource that's been made available to folks. And again, you can take your time to read through these things. I won't go into details to what the scripts say, but again, it's easily available and ready to go for folks that are willing to use it. And we are encouraging people to do it at all times of the day, every single day. We can't stop. We must flood the inboxes, whether they be email or phone inboxes in the legislators' offices, around demanding a ceasefire. We know that we have two extremely tireless advocates that have been really helping shape the demand here for a ceasefire, and that's Cori Bush and Rashida Tlaib. We are so appreciative for them, and that incredible amount of effort that we people have actually been able to cultivate, and the numbers of, like, we've now made hundreds of thousands of calls, we've sent hundreds of thousands of emails. The reality is that is actually working. So even though we started off with a ceasefire resolution that only had 2 folks on it, it's now around somewhere between 18 to 20 legislators who have signed on it. And then that didn't just happen in a vacuum. That happened because people were calling. That happened because legislators were now hearing, oh, my constituents care about this. So it's a really important, vital time for us to constantly encourage, and not to be discouraged by the small number, but rather encouraged by the fact that people are actually signing on, doing this work because they're hearing from folks, and they're also scared. I think that, Sandra talked a little bit about some demonstrations that have been happening in offices. And as a reminder that it's our duty to place this sort of responsibility on these legislators to make sure that they meet this demand, and that we would accept nothing less. Right now we're asking for a ceasefire because that's what the people of Gaza need. We have a whole list of demands that we want to ask for, but in this exact moment, we're asking for a ceasefire, and that's what we want to continue asking for. This is a little bit of a screenshot of what it looks like. Again, I'll allow folks to kind of take their time to look at it. If there are questions, happy to answer them as we go. Another tool that we've been also really encouraging folks, I think many people understand that we are encouraging everyone to share out as much information as possible across your social media platforms, whether that be Facebook, whether that be Instagram, Twitter, like whatever you have. I know they're also called many different things right now, whether it's X or Meta, whatever you want to call it. We are trying our best to ensure that folks are sharing out all these sorts of resources across social media. The reality is the repression right now is real. And we want to make sure that we're using all outlets possible to ensure that folks are actually getting access to these resources. So our hope is that you can actually take these links and send them to your friends and have your friends send them to your friends. And the hope there is that no matter what level of shadow banning exists across social media, we can actually ensure that this information is becoming accessible and readily available to people. And we know people text. We know that this happens. I know that if you're on your phone, you're probably also texting a friend. So the hope is that you can take this information, drop that link in the text thread, and make sure that they have this information readily available to them. It's all accessible via computer, phone, like whatever you want to use, it's all accessible. And we've already made that available to you. And we're happy to even go step by step as to how you want to set that up, what sort of text message you want to send. We really want to make sure that as many people as possible are using these tools because it's absolutely crucial right now. One thing that we want to build off of is the momentum that so many incredible organizations, Adalah Justice Project is an incredible organization that's been leading on like all these phenomenal demonstrations across Capitol Hill and in district. And one thing that we want to encourage folks to do is to do these sorts of demonstrations themselves. I promise you that many of us are at capacity right now, but it doesn't mean we're going to quit and it doesn't mean that we're not going to do anything. It means that we're just going to push and we're going to encourage folks to do those things alongside us. So one thing that we actually made as far as USCPR goes, made available on our Instagram, and was just a post that we posted a couple of hours ago. So if you actually go to USCPR on our Instagram page, you'll find all these sorts of visuals with all this information. So you can share it out, you can look at it yourself, whatever you want. But one thing that we really want to build up towards, especially since we were leading towards this national march on Saturday, November 4th, is a list of actions that we could potentially pursue as folks are kind of flooding the streets of Washington, D.C., are considering ramping up their efforts in their own local areas. And so we're launching what we're calling the Week of Action for Gaza this upcoming week. The first thing that we're asking folks to do is to do in-district visits at their rep's office. We know that, again, a lot of the efforts have been made on Capitol Hill, and that remains to be an incredibly important thing. But we also know many people can't be in DC, but that doesn't stop us from being able to influence our electeds in their own regions. And sometimes it's actually far more critical for folks to meet with their constituents in their constituent offices. And so we're encouraging folks to set up a local demonstration to pressure their member of Congress. And we're happy to help you. So if this is something that's of interest to you and you want to participate in, or you just need some support in figuring out how to structure that out, like we want to be of a resource to you and we want to support you in that. Additionally, we're looking to schedule a phone bank. So we also want to kind of just be partners in this. We really want to be neighbors. We want to make sure that it's easy. So if it's maybe easier for you to set an hour aside and join us for a power hour to discuss and how to go through the phone script and how to make those phone calls, then we encourage you to join us. We'll make sure that that information is available to you on our websites, as well as on our Instagram, and we're happy to text y'all to make sure that you get the up-to-date information as to what latest actions are happening. Again, we really want to make this as easy as possible for folks, so we're hoping that even if we set aside an hour online, you can join us and we can make the calls together. Sometimes it's just more helpful to be in the same room together. The second, we really want to encourage folks that can, and understand that it's not always possible, but that can, to arrive in DC a couple days before the November 4th march. Our hope there is to again, put that pressure on Congress. The hope is that maybe a ceasefire can happen before then, but if it doesn't, that we want to ensure that our Congress is hearing us loudly and understands that this is still a demand that we are making for the people of Gaza. And so one thing that we want to encourage is for folks to actually meet up with us a couple of days before and join us for these sorts of actions so that we can talk through what's going on and maybe set up some meetings that you have with your member of Congress while you're here. The more people power that we have in these efforts, the better. The more packed a room becomes, the better. The more voices that they hear, the better. And again, we want to make sure that that's available to you. And we're in the midst of right now organizing all of this and encourage y'all, again, if you're planning on being in DC for this upcoming weekend's actions, to join us a couple of days before then, if you can, for these lists of actions. And you can hit us up on USCPR, and I'll also drop maybe an email at the end as well for folks who may need it. Again, the last thing, as Sandra said, is the Washington, DC march, but there are also many other marches that are happening. And so one thing that we've actually tried to do is continue to compile a list of all those protests and demonstrations that are happening. They are happening really fast. So one, We want to make sure that we're up to date as much as possible. Our team is doing their best in making sure that this information that you find at this link is not only accessible, but also up to date. So if you don't happen to see something that you know you're looking for, or if you knew of a protest that you don't necessarily see on this list, we encourage you to reach out to us and let us know that immediately so we can, make sure that it's on this list. This will continue being updated as demonstrations and protests are happening, and many are happening. I know that one, for instance, just popped up in the last couple of hours, since there's been so much more escalation in Gaza in just the last few hours here in DC, even though there wasn't one this morning. And so things are popping up really quickly, and we want to make sure that this resource is available to you. So if you're looking for something in your own locality, or if you're looking for something in DC, in the DMV, let us know, and you might find it here. And if you don't, let us know, and we'll be happy to look up to see if there's anything else that's popped up. And then the last thing I want to mention is just, again, this is a really critical time for us to demand justice for Gaza. We are demanding a ceasefire in this immediate moment. We will call for a ceasefire. We will not stop until it happens. And we really want to make sure that we're doing our best in pulling through for our community back home in Gaza. For people like Jihad who have family back in Gaza, it is our duty and our responsibility to pull through. I promise you that we will not stop until we make sure that this happens. But even long after this ceasefire, we want to make sure that we're pushing against any additional military spending to Israel, as we know that if that continues, we'll only continue fueling this system of violence. So our hope is that you can join us not only for the short term, but also for the long term. We promise that organizations like ours are going to make sure that we have the information up to date, that our demands are updated, and we make it as easy as possible for you to plug in, because we know that the wider this movement becomes, and it's huge. I want to acknowledge how big this movement has become. As a Palestinian, I have been so moved and so emotional with the level of commitments people have made. And I so appreciate everyone coming up and showing up every single day to demonstrations, but also making these calls. I see y'all, we see the numbers growing. We're hearing from staffers on the Hill, as well as members on the Hill, that their inboxes are flooded. And we know that you are listening, you are doing this. And we hope that the people of Gaza, we're trying our best to ensure that for as long as we can communicate out with the people of Gaza, that we are making sure that they know that the people across this country, as well as the international community, are doing all that they can. And we want to make sure that, again, we have y'all join us in this fight for the long term. So we hope that you could use our resources, again, either from USCPR, Adalah, and make sure that you're supporting these organizations as well as Jihad's organization. Gaza Center is doing a phenomenal job, and I want to make sure that we're doing all that we can for one another. So I'll stop with that.
Thank you so much, Sandra and Iman, for these informative presentations and for sharing all of these resources with our audience tonight. We have some questions, but before I get to the questions from the attendees, who I encourage, if you guys have any questions for Sandra or Iman, please feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen and type your question, and I will make sure to address it to our speakers. I would like to start by asking about the state of the ceasefire now resolution, or if you could provide a little bit of context. Who introduced this resolution? What's a resolution, and why does it matter? Who's currently supporting it, and what needs to be done in order to support it further?
Yeah, I can jump in, Iman. I'm sure you know more about what's happening today in DC, but a resolution is not is a declaration. It's not legislation. It's not binding, but it is a tool to organize Congress. And many of us were in consultation with Cori Bush's office and Rashida Tlaib's office to think about what kind of tool was needed in this moment. So the resolution that was introduced last week is a very simple resolution. It only calls for two things. It calls for an immediate ceasefire, and it calls for the immediate provision of humanitarian assistance to the people, to the Palestinians of Gaza. Now, that is not the kind of vehicle we normally get behind. It lacks all the context. It lacks all of our history. on all of the origin story, right, of this terrible, terrible story that we have experienced as Palestinians. But the strategy was simple, that we were going to have a resolution that would define where people stood. Were people willing to stand against a genocide, or were they not? And it's that simple. And unfortunately, the answer so far has been that most of them are not willing to stand up against genocide. We only have 18 members of the House that have signed on to this resolution. It is maybe not surprising to many of us who have been doing this work for some time that all 18 of those members are people of color, Black and brown, the people who know what it means to be dehumanized, the people that know what it means to be exposed to state violence. And these are the people that are sticking their heads out to call for what should be a very simple call, which is a ceasefire. The mood in Washington right now is absolutely, I don't even know what the word is. It is unbelievably violent and dehumanizing and racist, and we have no room. We have not been able to even figure out where there's room to maneuver. So I know that's really depressing. I know that that's demoralizing. And that's why we just have to keep escalating our demands and our actions. I mean, I'm really heartened by the pictures I'm seeing out of New York City tonight, where people have shut down the train system in New York City, the Grand Central Station. I'm saying that we need to be creative in the way that we do this work going forward. If the representatives aren't listening to us, then we have to think about how we shut down the system. We can't allow this to be business as usual while they continue to kill our people. So I think that's a summary of where we are. What can I offer that's any kind of glimmer of hope? I will say, I think it is interesting. As everyone probably remembers, Barbara Lee was the sole member of Congress who voted against the Iraq War, right, and voted against the Afghanistan war. And she was a little bit late in signing on to the resolution, but she did get on, and she's now running for Senate. She's running for Dianne Feinstein's seat. And her campaign now has taken on the tagline of "she's the only anti-war candidate." And I think that's really interesting, because I think she definitely is reading the polling, and she sees where the American public is. And I think she understands Black America in a way that the Biden administration does not. I spoke to a clergy member who is originally from St. Louis, a Black clergy member who now has a position in DC. And she told me that Black clergy were on the phone with White House advisors today. And the White House tried to, spin, what's happening, tried to give this, these really terrible propaganda points about, well, we don't know really how many people have died. And they shut that down immediately. And they said, it doesn't matter how many people have died. It doesn't matter what the exact number is. We know that people are dying, period. And this has to stop. You're committing a genocide. And they said very plainly to the White House that if you think we are going to tell our people, we're going to mobilize a Get Out the Vote campaign in 2024, you're sadly mistaken. And they really got the impression that the Biden campaign and advisors believed that Black America would vote for him because they were too afraid of Trump. But it's becoming very clear that they will not overlook this genocide, and they won't forget. And so the political price, I saw there were a few questions about this. The political price is going to be high. And I think that those conversations are going to continue as we get closer to the election.
Thank you, Sandra, for giving us an assessment of where the ceasefire resolution now stands. Again, it is an important message. It addresses an urgent need. There is a sense of urgency to stop the killing. And it is important to keep pushing. I'm going to take some questions from our attendees. For people who are who have questions or comments, please make sure to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. Our webinar system does not allow for including more speakers as we talk, so apologies about that. We have one technical question about the defining bird dogging. I don't think a lot of people are familiar with this concept. If you don't mind just giving us, just explain what bird dogging means, and if you could mention an example of an instance where you did bird dogging and engaged with a member of Congress or a politician.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. And Sandra, please feel free to share your experiences. So bird dogging is when you catch an elected off guard. So essentially, rather than setting up a meeting with them and having them prepare and plan something out for you, you either just show up, or you happen, like whether it be at their office, or you maybe know that they're at a public event, and you kind of force a response out of them on something that you know is quite controversial. So in this case, of course, we would be trying to encourage someone to respond to whether or not they are supporting a ceasefire, or answering the question as to why they're not supporting the ceasefire and why are they supporting a genocide. But it's really to encourage and to kind of agitate these electeds that are not movable, or are movable, but need that level of escalation, or like that push to encourage them to actually make the moral choice here. So Sandra, I don't know if you want to share your experiences where you've done bird dogging.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to think about, like, look at the schedule of these electeds, find out when they're going to be, you know, at a veterans event, for instance, in November, or when they're going to be, you know, cutting a ribbon somewhere. And, you know, just you and a few other people can easily, you know, just with, you know, someone recording it, ask questions. And these elected officials are very narcissistic. They like to hear themselves talk. They don't really know how to keep their mouths closed, and so they often will slip up, especially when they don't have the talking points in front of them. So it's a really effective way of making them sweat a little bit and getting their positions on the record, because, you know, they have their talking points right now. But when they speak freely, off the cuff, they really will reveal their racism. They'll reveal their genocidal intent, and I think that we want to make sure that the voters, understand what we're dealing with.
Thank you. There's a question, I think, from Kate about the Senate. Kate says, I know the focus is on the House, but is anything happening in the Senate? We're in Vermont. We are where we are deeply disappointed at Bernie's response.
Aren't we all? There is advocacy happening at the Senate level, Iman. I know that our team was just in a meeting. I haven't gotten, and maybe Jihad, you were there, but I think Senator Van Hollen, who has sided with our kinds of resolutions and our kinds of positions in the past. But we haven't had one senator speak out for a ceasefire yet. It is terribly, terribly disappointing. And I think a lot of the House leadership is waiting for that, waiting for a senator to say something. If you are in Vermont, continue putting pressure on Sanders. I know that if not now, is in his office on, gosh, what day of the week is it? On Wednesday. And I think that kind of pressure is really important for him to hear from Jewish young people, because he claims to be, you know, in solidarity with them, or to, you know, represent them. We really have to find, like, I don't know what it's going to take. Like, this makes no sense to me. We really are dealing with a very difficult moment and a really monstrous, like, yeah, political system at this time.
We have a question from Reverend Donald Wagner, who I would like to send a big shout out to, a good friend of mine and someone who I admire a lot. He asks if have you ever reached out to Reverend William Barber and the Poor People's Campaign to adopt the ceasefire resolution? He is sympathetic, but the movement has been silent on this issue to his knowledge.
I have not been personally in touch with the Poor People's Campaign, but we have a lot of people that have been working with us, especially with the Jeffries pray-in that we did, who are connected to the Poor People's Campaign. Our friend Sierra is with the Gaza Center, which is a faith-based organization, and has been organizing, has started to organize clergy. And I think it's a really important question, Don. I know that Reverend Barber has been sympathetic. He did speak at a US campaign conference in 2019, I believe it was, in Minneapolis. And he's talked about Palestine. I noticed that one of the leaders of the Poor People's Campaign joined the Signal thread for the clergy for Palestine. So I think it's up to us to now really follow up and make those asks. So thank you for the nudge.
Thank you. I think there is a question which I think is a follow-up to the earlier question about defining bird dogging. A question from Aisha, who asks, where do you go to find out what events electeds will be attending?
I don't actually know that, so I don't know, Sandra, you know.
I'm sorry, I made the mistake of looking down at my phone. Could you repeat the question?
Where do you go to find out what events elected representatives be attending?
Yeah, usually they will announce, but very late. You have to kind of keep an eye on their social media or on their website. And they usually will announce where they're going to be maybe that day or the next day. Don't expect that they are announcing weeks in advance. They don't do that kind of thing. But if you're interested in knowing, it's really a matter of knowing when Congress is out of session. Now they have a speaker again, so they are in session. But you can look at the congressional calendar online and get a sense for when House members will be back in district. And that's what they do. That when they're in district, they're doing events and they're meeting with constituents. So just keep an eye out for those kinds of events.
Wonderful. We have a comment from Hana that they must hold town halls within their districts periodically. They often are quiet about that because they don't want you to do bird dogging, etc. You can call their offices and ask. They also have events posted on their websites sometimes. So pay attention to town halls that are organized in the district on a regular basis. If the town halls aren't well advertised, just give them a call and ask when they're happening. There are some questions in the chat that I can all combine under one short question of what's the point. And I think both of you have touched on what's the point as part of your presentations. I mean, and for me personally, as a Palestinian from Gaza, as someone who's active in this movement, as someone who's part of these efforts, I personally see the point. But I think I believe our guests here are much more knowledgeable than me about these issues, and I think just maybe a quick reminder about the importance of translating our demands and our aspirations into concrete political action.
Yeah, I know. Like, I want to completely be honest. I know that many people are like, why are we spending our time on Congress? Like, this is such a demoralizing place. And I can assure you that sometimes, yes, the conversations are quite demoralizing. And you can leave the halls of the Capitol thinking to yourself, my God, like, what am I doing? But I think the reality is there is so much power that exists within that establishment and that institution, that if our voices are not heard, we are only allowing them to continue listening to Zionist, pro-Israeli voices. And I think that in that case, say, for instance, we decide that within our advocacy, we're just not going to focus on Congress anymore. We're just not going to target Congress. We're going to focus on, just public discourse, and we're going to educate people. The reality is still there's no targeting of who carries the most power when it comes to what is upholding the Zionist regime. And I want to take a step back and remind ourselves again that every year we've been spending $3.8 billion on this country, on Israel. And yet we can't even spend enough on our own social services. We can't spend enough on our healthcare. We can't spend enough on our education. We just went through a pandemic. We're dealing with the consequences of the pandemic. And yet they're still choosing to send this military funding to Israel unconditionally, regardless of the decisions that Israel, chooses to commit, just because it's they have this strong allyship. And of course, there's a whole historical context as to why the United States has this relationship with them. But the reality is that this is just what the role Congress plays in upholding this apartheid regime. And so for us, we want to kind of remind folks that are in power that it's also their responsibility to listen to the American public and remind them that we are also here representing what most actually are in favor of. And while Congress actually doesn't represent what the American public represents, there's a huge actually just dissonance between what Congress's value, where most congressional electeds values are, and where the American public's value is. And even long before October 7th, we saw a number of polling. Gallup was actually, or Brookings Institution had hosted a number of different polls on one, like the general Jewish American public's view on what's going on in Israel, and then just the general American public's view on what's going on in Israel. And there's been an overwhelming disapproval of what's been happening. We even saw the rise up in the disapproval people have had of the latest, Israeli administration under Netanyahu's rule. So we've seen this dissonance, we've seen this rejection of where Israel is at, and a lot of that power just continues to go back down to Congress. And so oftentimes we actually hear from members, again, I want to say that there's been such a stark difference. So oftentimes when we're the ones, especially all of us, we are the ones that are actually calling for the meetings. They'll send you a staffer here or there. But if, someone who's far more pro-Israeli is asking it, the member will make themselves available like that. And so the power, clearly we see where the power dynamic is at. But the reality is that the louder that our voices become, the more that they start to see, our constituent bases actually really care about this issue. It does start to turn the tide towards us. And that has actually changed. So I think the number of folks who are still continuing to support the Palestinian people is still higher right now. It's been difficult to find that. I don't want to disregard how difficult it sometimes feels, but the reality is that we still have to find some way to target that. I promise you as well, I want to acknowledge we've spent so much time talking about targeting Congress here, that this is just done in simultaneously with so many other methods that I think people are using, whether it's educating the public, whether it's just having conversations outside of congressional spaces. Right now, this specific demand for a ceasefire is being spent tirelessly on Congress, because they do play an influence as to what the rest of, what actually will play out in the region. And so I think it's important for us to continue pushing that out.
Thank you, Iman. We have 5 more minutes before we conclude. I just have, and I know there are a lot of questions, unfortunately, we won't be able to address all of them. But in a few words, when our attendees and those who are going to watch this webinar later, when they wake up on Monday morning, what's the first thing they should do? Just as a quick reminder.
Pick up the phone, call your 3 representatives, your 2 senators, and your House member. Use the US campaign call script. It's very easy. They will actually ring the office for you. So Iman, maybe you should drop that link again. And Yeah, I think that's the right answer, Jihad. Is that the right answer? Call for a ceasefire, be very forceful. Ask them when is my senator going to call for a ceasefire?
Thank you so much, Sandra. And with that note, we come to conclude our webinar. Iman and Sandra, thank you so much for the amazing presentations you gave tonight, for the information that you shared with us. And before we conclude, I would like to remind our attendees to visit the JerusalemFund.org. Please RSVP for our annual conference, which will take place on November 10th. We have a lineup of excellent speakers. I'm sure a lot of people are searching for answers and reflections, especially in light of what's happening in Gaza. Support our appeal. We're raising funds to support UNRWA's relief effort. They're facing an immense task ahead of them, and we would like to support their efforts. Visit our website, sign up, join our mailing list, and follow the Jerusalem Fund and Palestine Center on social media, and also follow Adalah Justice Project and USCPR, learn about their work, and join all of these efforts that are hopefully helping push towards a ceasefire and to stop the killing that's happening in Gaza. Thank you all for attending. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you so much for being with us here tonight. We will be making this recording available on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook. We will also be sending the link to you. We hope that this webinar will be a resource for you, your friends, your family, your community, and an inspiration for you to take action and keep pushing. And until then, thank you so much in solidarity, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Jihad.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.